Hello and welcome to the 40th edition of Half Hour, a podcast starring me, John Paul Giudice, as your host. In today's episode, I will discuss Norway's place in the world with Ambassador Victor Rønneberg. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
I hope I got your name right. I have a tough last name myself, so.
That's fine, that worked fine.
So if you want to begin and go ahead and tell kind of the audience, what your background is or, your education, how did you find yourself kind of in this position?
Well, my education is I'm a political scientist. I've studied places in Europe, in the US, worked in the foreign service now for many, many years, more than 30 years, but also worked in the Norwegian Parliament and at the Prime Minister's office for some years. But I've been posted abroad, many places in Europe, NATO, Denmark, Africa, Kenya, Australia, and then Brussels, NATO. Yeah.
What would you say your time in? So when you say you were in Parliament, you were a representative for a certain constituency?
No. I was heading the international work in Parliament. In the Parliament, the parliamentarians, they have a lot of international work. Most international organization has parliamentary. Parliamentary institutions, parliamentary committees, so I work with them. I was a secretary then of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, as we call it in the Norwegian Parliament.
Okay, that's some wonderful experience. And when you say you worked with the Prime Minister, is it the same one that's there now? I don't know how many iterations of Prime Ministers you guys usually have.
No, I worked a bit with Jens Stoltenberg. He's now the Secretary General of NATO.
Oh, okay.
But certainly I worked with the Prime Minister before that, and also many foreign ministers. I headed the secretariat of 3 different foreign ministers, but this was some time back.
Oh, okay, wonderful. So if you want to, we can jump right into the topic.
Sure.
If you want. Norway's place in the world. Me as an outsider, kind of. Thinking about what I know about Norway. I took a trip there. I had the privilege of going. I went to go see the Northern Lights in November of 2021. That was really something special, up in Tromsø. Very beautiful place. The mountains and the nature of this country is absolutely incredible, really.
I hope you liked it, because we don't have too many tourists during the winter. We have a lot during the summer, but we also have a lot to offer during the winter. So I'm glad you enjoyed it, and particularly then the Northern Light, which is really spectacular, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, we got really lucky, and Norway is very interesting because it's so far north that in the summer and in the winter you guys don't have much in terms of daylight or night time, depending on the season.
That's right. A lot of people have heard about the midnight sun, of course, but the total darkness during the winter is also something to experience.
Yeah, that must be really incredible. I know that Norway has some tremendous oil reserves and maybe not natural gas, but in terms of energy, you guys have a lot of deposits, either along the coastline or a little bit into the Atlantic. But I know that that's a huge piece of kind of what helps Norway, not only with their economy, but with global trade and, things of this nature?
Yeah, maybe I can explain a bit of that. Norway, we found the first petroleum that was actually oil in the late 1960, early 1970. And we have then pumped quite a bit of oil and gas since then. Most has been exported to Europe. Right now, I think 95% of our gas is going to Europe, and it's mostly piped, through different pipes. We have 8,800 kilometers of pipes in the North Sea going to different countries in Europe. But the interesting thing I think about, or what you should note about this oil, is that it has been there for millions of years, and it's not really for our generation to use up everything. Mm-hmm. So what we have done is that I put all that oil, when we sold it, we put all the money in a fund, in an oil sovereign wealth fund, which actually is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world right mm-hmm. now. And then we use a little part of that, up to 3% of that every year, the revenues from that fund, which means in theory it should never run out. since we never use of the actual fund, we only use of the revenues. And that's of course an important part that contributes to the Norwegian economy. And all over oil and gas, are offshore. So there is really, it's on the continental shelf, so it's really we don't have any problems with private ownership, because everything belongs to the state, and this actually is for our generation, but also for future generations to come.
So Norway has really kind of set themselves up, for the future very well, kind of future-proof this massive fund.
Well, it's in most countries that found huge natural resources, they actually use it up, and it goes up and down with the prices. For us, it doesn't really matter if the price goes up and down. We still use, they're part of the fund, revenue of the fund, but still the fund is increasing, and certainly will be used then for future generation and for future pensions and other costs that the state incurs.
Moving into kind of the, the military sector. Norway has been a member of the NATO alliance, since its founding, or maybe right after. My memory forgets me now, but I know that this was a country that was directly influenced by the events of the Second World War, and that probably had something to do with them joining in 1945. Or the NATO alliance?
Sure. NATO was like the Czech Republic. We were occupied by the Nazis during the war. In fact, we had many hundred thousands Nazi soldiers in Norway, mostly up north, where it was heavily bombed during the war. But actually the reason why we joined NATO has to do with what happened in the Czech Republic in 1948, because we were working on having kind of a defense alliance among the northern countries. But after the coup here in 1948, just a few days later, it became clear that we had to join hands with the US and as a stronger allies, and we joined NATO then from the beginning. But one thing that's also a bit kind of particularly with Norway and then the Soviet Union, it was actually the Soviet Union that liberated the northern Norway from the Nazis, and then they withdrew again. So I mean, one of the places that the Soviet withdrew, so we haven't really been at war with the Soviet Union or with Russia anytime. But certainly we are now seeing what's happening, and certainly following all the European sanctions and doing whatever we can to help Ukraine in the terrible situation that has happened there due to the Russian invasion.
It's funny you mentioned that. I spoke to this man and his son at the airport. I think I may have been in Copenhagen. I was coming back from my trip in Norway, and he mentioned how the Soviets were in northern Norway for some time, not spectacularly long, but they were there. No. And he mentioned that the Norwegians had a hand, but also the U.S. and the Allies had a hand in telling them, okay, like it's time to go. We were kind of redrawing the continental boundaries of Europe at the time, and I know that there was some trade-off given, like the Soviets may not have left if we didn't kind of accede to them something else. I'm not sure what that was, but it's really interesting you bring up the coup in 1948 in the Czech Republic. I had no clue that Norway was thinking about joining more of a regional defense pact with its neighbors. But at the end of the day, Norway and Denmark ended up joining NATO very early.
Yeah.
Recently, Finland joined in, what was it this year? It was 2023.
Yeah.
And I've heard that Sweden is also expected to kind of join as well.
Very shortly, yes.
What are Norway's thoughts on this, or maybe your thoughts in general? But as a representative, but moreover, should they have been part of this alliance much earlier, or?
Well, that's of course up to them to decide. But first of all, it's fair to know that, first of all, I mean, during the Second World War, the Soviet Union and the US were allies. I mean, and the reason why Norway is so much affected by the war was because of the convoys going to Murmansk with American military aid to the Soviet Union that was brought in up north to fight the Germans on the eastern front. Those convoys went through Norway, up outside Norway. That's why they had all the bases there, and that's of course why the Nazis wanted to bomb Murmansk and had so many forces there. After the war, the Soviet has built up the largest base with nuclear weapons in the world. Actually, is located just about 150 kilometers from the Norwegian border. That's where they have their nuclear, the SLBMs, the submarines with ballistic missiles.
And that's
that's close to Murmansk. And so I mean, these weapons are of course not aimed at Norway, but still we have a huge military base there, and on the Soviet side. Although now a lot of the land forces there actually has gone to Ukraine, and I think they've been decimated because they are certainly not so much there anymore. But we certainly have seen what Russia can do, and are very much preparing ourselves for a more difficult future. And to that end, we are very glad that Finland has joined. We expect Sweden to join NATO shortly, and that's certainly in our interest too, because that will give them much more depth in the defense, and also, I mean, these countries together are a fairly strong power. So certainly that's an advantage for them. It's an advantage for us, and it's an advantage for NATO.
Yeah, the Baltic Sea would be much more secure, given the membership of these two countries.
Yes, that's certainly what we believe. Yes.
Talking about Norway's place in the world just a little bit. This is kind of not like a very big point, but I know that Norway owns an island very close to Antarctica. It's called Bouvet Island.
Bouvet Island.
Do people travel there, like, ever?
No, I mean, Norway. We're very much involved in whaling. A long time, in the 40s, 50s, and even before a bit. And actually, we have helped extinct the blue whale down there, and that's of course where they have the bases. We also, have a part of the South Pole that we don't really own, but actually we claim to it, like many other countries, like the U.S. and other countries. Reason for that is, of course, that the first person on the South Pole was a Norwegian, was Roald Amundsen, and we also have a research station down there. But these are areas where we certainly are not actually part of Norwegian mainland, or anything like that. It's just that areas that we claim. But on the Bouvet Island, it's a kind of a natural reserve in many ways, so we try help take care of it.
Given the kind of situation that has unfolded between Russia, Ukraine, in Central and Eastern Europe, even in Northern Europe as well. Given Norway's kind of energy supplies, I don't know if your country has a lot of liquid natural gas, LNG.
Yes.
But I've heard that the EU has become a tremendous partner now, like very recently, because of this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have because natural gas, it's kind of difficult to transport. You have to either freeze it down to cool it down. Our LNG on ships, we have about 5% of our gas is transported that way, but 95% go through pipes, and those pipes, go in mostly to Europe, UK, Germany, Holland, and so forth. And we have always been providing quite a bit of energy to Europe, but after the Russian invasion and after the kind of the closing down of gas supplies from Russia, we have increased. So we are now producing at full capacity to Europe, and I think we are delivering something around 27-28% of Europe's total consumption of natural gas.
Wow. What was the number before the war? Was it much lower?
It was around 20, I think. Yes, it was a bit lower. Right now, we are producing more than 100% because we are postponing some maintenance, non-essential maintenance, and so forth, and not kind of refining the gas the way we used to do before, just to pump as much as possible. But fortunately now, I mean, it seems that we have come through the winter fairly good way, and we are also very glad that the prices has gone down, so they are more stable. It's not in Norway's interest to have high and unstable prices, because 80% of our trade is with Europe. So if actually this high energy prices lead to a diminishing economy in Europe, we will certainly also be hurt a lot. And of course also the prices of both gas and electricity is the same in Norway as in the European Union.
So I know that the United States and Qatar are stepping up their exports of LNG to Europe as well. But do you think there's any plans in the future for Norway to kind of either build a new pipeline or really kind of ratchet up the percentages of trade with the LNG? I know you said it was 20% in the past and roughly, and now it's maybe roughly like 27, 28. Do you think that this number will continue to rise, and at what rate?
Well, you see, what happened is that there are private companies that do this, and of course they look into the economics of this. The problem is, of course, that it takes many years to build a pipeline, and of course, so they will have to look what do they think that the prices will be in 5, 10, 15 years from now, and even further. But we certainly believe that also gas in particular can be a part of this change to a greener economy. I mean, like you can have blue hydrogen, and there are different ways of seeing too that we will transfer to a greener economy, and certainly so we expect them to be more gas and less petrol in a way, or less oil actually. Yeah.
What is Norway doing to transition in this direction?
Well, I think we are doing quite a bit. First of all, Norway, we have more than 90% of our energy is from, and our electricity actually is from hydroelectric power. We have a lot of hydroelectric power, which also means that all our houses, most houses are heated with electricity. We have by far the most electric cars in the world. I think about 90% of all new cars in Norway, actually 94% I think are electric.
Oh, wow.
And half of all the cars on the roads are electric. We have electric ferries, electric buses, electric everything. So we are doing quite a bit there. We are electrifying also our petroleum industry and the platforms actually to reduce the emissions there. And certainly we are investing a lot in green energy. Our major, well, the largest Norwegian energy company, Equinor, certainly is investing a lot in green energy, and not least with regard to wind energy offshore. So we have built offshore off New York. We have a huge field there that they are building, New York in the US. Outside the UK we are building, and of course outside Norway. And the good thing when you have them offshore, you don't create so many protests because people don't want these windmills, that they can see them. But they are pretty far at sea, and we are certainly working very hard to promote those kind of solutions also. In addition, we are working on solar. We have Scantec Solar. They're also here making fairly large solar farms. So we are doing the best we can.
So you guys are really kind of diversifying your green energy position. I think that's very that's very good. That is a very good position. I know that the region of the United States where I'm from, New England, we're doing things. We're trying to. Of course, there's 6 states in this region, so it's very tough. I say to my friends who live here, and they ask me, what is it like where I'm from? Those 6 states are very interconnected. Maybe not to the fullest extent they could be, but they are very connected. People travel constantly between these 6 states. It's almost like one state itself. I know that Massachusetts has spent a lot of time and energy trying to kind of diversify its situation. And a fun fact is that my state actually imported the most Russian oil or gas or whatever, like per capita in the entire union. So our percentage of what we were importing was very high from Russia. So we had to kind of switch partners there. But my state, my region, much like your country, is blessed with a very, very large coastline. I would say for any region in the United States, I think New England has a pretty long and extensive coastline. Especially in Maine, you have a lot of things that are almost like a fjord. There's a lot of islands in there, and you can see where the glaciers kind of pulled back. But it must be really good to be able to have those wind farms out in the ocean where people might not be able to see them and complain, and you're also getting the energy from them, and the coastline's so long that you can really place these windmills in a lot of spots.
Yeah, that you're right, and we have a long coastline. I think it's the second longest in the world after Canada, actually. But still, there are fishing rights. There are also discussions that they can well care about this and trying to find the best place to place them. But I think this has to do also with technological. We try to use some of the expertise from the oil sector with these floating windmills, and how actually can you organize this in a way that you can use the technology that we already have to kind of make it as efficient as possible and economically sound as possible.
Mm-hmm. Kind of shifting into a kind of a different avenue, Norway will soon be the only country in Scandinavia that is not part of the European Union and NATO. Sweden, I think you're right, they will join, making Norway kind of this last sort of holdout. I think Iceland isn't part of the EU as well, but do you think that Norway will kind of reassess its position and someday apply to join the European Union or really ascend to membership?
Well, actually, we have applied twice, and we have had 2 referendums, and both times the population said no. It was in 1972 and 1994, the last time. And one reason for that was because we just a few years back, before 1994, we entered into the EEA agreement, which meant that we are actually a de facto member of the European Union when it comes to all the economic side. So I mean we are more integrated economically in the European Union than most European Union countries. Mm-hmm. As I said, we are 80% of our trade, and we also have a lot of other agreements with the EU. So we are very much integrated in many areas, but we are not a full member. That is correct. And this means that a lot of the rules and regulations that the EU decides, we are taking into our own legal system and following that. But we're not actually sitting at the table when they decide. And many people think that's a great disadvantage. But as long as the population would like to have it the way it is, we will remain outside and try to get closer and closer as the European Union actually develops in different areas. You can of course argue that now it's a long time ago, 30 years since we had the last referendum, so why don't you have a new one? But there is actually no demand in Norway to have that, since we are doing quite well outside and we feel very European, it's fair to say. Mm-hmm. Let me also say that one reason why there was a no during this round was certainly because of Norway, because of the fish resources. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was afraid that that the EU would actually deplete us. We had a fairly good arrangement with the fish, and that has worked quite well. So and the other was, of course, Norway is a very long and lots of Norwegians live far from anywhere.
Yeah. And
it's very far from northern Norway to Oslo. It could be 1,500 kilometers, and then they think it's far to Oslo, and Oslo decides what's going to happen up north, and they think if Brussels were to decide more, that would certainly be a much further distance. So it's a kind of mental thing also. But I do not think that there will be a new application in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Are there any issues in Norway that are very, divisive? I mean, in the United States, we have a plethora of issues that are very politically divisive among our people. Yeah. I notice in a lot of European countries, it's never such a strong division between people. And I was wondering if in Norway, maybe it's the EU application, maybe it's maybe the green energy you were speaking of, or the export of LNG, or like any of these. Is there anything that people really find themselves divided between?
No, clearly not to the extent that you have in the US or in many other European countries also. I think the thing with Norway is that it's a homogeneous population. I mean, and we are few. It's only 5.5 million, and the glue that binds us together has always been very strong. You know, we were under Danish rule for 400 years, and we were under Swedish rule for 100 years. So we actually were the kind of the people, a lot of peasant-like country, and we are fairly young as a nation state. So we are very much integrated, I think, in many ways, more than many other countries. So there are really no particular issue apart from the EU issue. Then the referendum for European Union, that was really something that could bring up to the dinner table and create a lot of problems with our families. But certainly. We don't really have so much. It's also because of we have all the political parties agree very much that we should try to keep the country together and focus what's important for the country and not go this way of polarization, which we believe is not good for the coherence of the country. It's not good for our security. It's not good for the role that we can play in the world. So in many ways we are certainly sorry to see this increase in polarization in many countries that we do not think benefit any of us actually.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say the polarization in America is no good. You know, I really think that affects all the issues that you were speaking of. You know, on a more geographical note, my state is very much quite small. I forget just how big it is, but it is very small. There's 7 million people living in my state, and most of them live around the greater Boston area.
Right. Bit more than us then, huh?
Yeah, and to hear about, you know, Norway is a massive country. It is really large, and as you were saying, a lot of people don't live in the city centers. You know, you have Oslo, Trondheim, you know, Bergen, you know, Stavanger, like these areas. You know, these are like the cities, but you know, most of the country is very much, you know, rural and sparse. And I bet you that not only had an effect on the EU referendum, but also you know, just the kind of, you know, the direction the country finds itself in, and you know, mixed with the homogeneousness of the country, I think that you know, there's a really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's also fair to say that, I mean, the economic lives, all part of Norway contribute to Norway. I mean, a lot of the furniture industry, a lot of the kind of course, oil industry, a lot of the fishing industry is out in the rural areas. So I mean, it's not so that everything is produced in the center and then all the other parts support on support from the center or from the big cities. It's more or less the other way around. That a lot of economic profits are produced outside the main cities.
And you know, it's no secret that the countries around Norway are very related. You know, you talked about how you know, Norway was under Danish and Swedish rule for different time periods, and you know, Finland was under Swedish rule for a long time. Even the Russians were there too, actually. You know, there's been a lot of talk of some sort of Nordic Union. Does this have any sort of, you know, credence? Is this something that should seriously be looked at, you know, for whether the economic, military, political gains that this would have?
Of course. I mean, first of all, we had, as I told you, you know, we Norway at least was very arguing for a strong Norwegian defense cooperation. Now we have that, but we have it within NATO. We have the Nordic cooperation. We didn't have any passports among the Nordic states long before the EU started with this Schengen agreement. I mean, so we have a Nordic Council, we have Nordic cooperation, we have Nordic Baltic cooperation, we have Nordic Arctic cooperation. We have a lot of Nordic cooperations, and actually, in many ways, I mean, we are each other's largest trading partners in many ways. So I mean, the Nordic cooperation is very, very strong, both economically and politically. And you see, we have more or less the same, you know, we have the same political challenges, you know, more or the same political questions on the agenda and so forth. So I dare say that we are closely, very, very closely integrated, regardless of the fact that Norway is not a member of the European Union.
Okay. You know, we're kind of getting towards the end here. There's about maybe a minute and a half left, maybe a little bit longer. If you want to leave the audience with any kind of, you know, thought or maybe last statement, you know, about Norway's place in the world and where you see it in the future, and, you know, what can be done now.
Well, I'd like to say that Norway, I think we have been blessed from nature's side. We have raw materials, we have a well-functioning society, and we certainly want to be a force for good. And we are working very good with other European countries. With here in the Czech Republic, of course, we are working extremely well with the United States and other allies, and we certainly will continue doing that and contribute to the common good.
I like that. I think that's good. All right. Well, thank you very much
Sure.
for coming on the show. I really appreciate
Pleasure
it.
being here.
Guys, watch out for episode 41 and peace. Cheers.